on energy and blockchain. And this is the fourth time I've been involved with the Global Blockchain Summit, so it's a great summit, and thank you all for inviting us. And I would like to kick off with just a brief introduction of our distinguished panelists here, who really are world-class speakers, like the banner says, and delight everyone's here. So we have first from Instan, Mr. Gabriel, and Chuck Manto from Annapolis, and Ryan Broughton from here in Denver, and then also Albright from Denver as well. But our conversation today is going to revolve around energy and resiliency, and how blockchain kind of fits into that and can make a difference. How we're going to apply the decentralization to the energy sector in a resilient and secure manner. So we're going to look at cybersecurity a little bit as well, and how things can affect. But one thing I want to say, and that prompted this sort of energy conversation in the direction of it, it really kind of twofold. But one is that Ryan, because I'm not sure he would quite tell everybody this, but Ryan is the former emergency director from Denver, and prior to that, he was the emergency director of San Jose. And prior to that, he was the worldwide emergency director for the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. And so, we have somebody who's probably the top person in maybe the world on emergency management. So energy obviously is so important. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be even talking about blockchain if we didn't have energy and oil to get here. And I know that Chris has also been that's for a long time. Chuck Manto holds 7 patents revolving around EMP and its protection. And we'll let him dive a little bit more into that. It has an R&D firm that looks at resiliency of emergency or resiliency of energy. And certainly Hunter has been involved, and he's just actually talking about a solution that's being used in the industry. So actually, Hunter, why don't you lead off and tell us a little bit about your experience and how the blockchain is being used right now.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I sort of wear 2 different hats. Sort of head up the University of Colorado's Blockchain Alliance, and we're doing research and partnering with CCIA, which is Colorado Clean Tech Industry Association, and doing some work with NRail. And on that side, we're starting to think about how blockchain can be used from sort of at the grid edge, and sort of what would be needed to enable sort of prosumers and sort of all of the optimization of energy consumption and purchase and essentially distribution. One of the key challenges there is going to ultimately be how fast the data is, and then how the quality of the data, so that all the transactions can be tracked. And so there's something on the research we're doing through CU is thinking about what are the interim steps to get there, as well as what do the end use cases look like. And then the other sort of hat I wear is with the CEO of a company called Curve 10, where we do a lot of innovation work. And one of the partners we're working with is Cable Labs. And one of the interesting things there is the cable network, which is just as large as the utility or the power grid, has a lot of sensors on it in terms of keeping all of our broadband on. And the great thing is we can monitor whether power is on or off because of a lot of the sensors. And we're finding that one of the best use cases, we thought we were going to be monitoring power quality. And what we're now monitoring, and the use case that people are most interested is actually safety and resilience, and even sort of cybersecurity. So we can tell when it's gone off. We help localize how close it is to high at-risk populations to help sort of emergency response, first responders figure out where to go, and also based on the history, be able to predict when we think the power is going to go on, if it's sort of something from an overload or if it's something that occurs more regularly. So it's not on the blockchain yet, but the designs are to look at that, because the companies don't want the data to be available for everybody, and so they want to be able to protect who gets into it and when and how. And so that is one of the use cases that we're helping explore.
Excellent. And real quickly, because I realized I didn't introduce myself, I don't think. I'm Nina Nichols, and I'm the founder of Global Women in Blockchain, and I also founded and run Resolution Research, and we've done quite a bit of research in the energy industry, from IoT devices, like we did a very large study with PG&E to monitor if they could turn off the power up or down in California, and a variety of different things that we've looked at over the years. So that's kind of how I came to this, and then I've also worked in the energy industry and looking at resiliency, and I'm really passionate about that. So I'm really honored to be working with this panel. So Ryan, you have the microphone, so why don't you kick it up and tell us a little bit more about yourself too.
So on the emergency management side, we're concerned about the continuation of everything from water, telecom, power, the supply chain as a whole, to keep the people fed, keep the people watered, keep the people communicating during an emergency. So in the resilience side and the preparedness side, we're looking at things like the Brooklyn microgrid is an example that we were briefed on as part of what's called the Big City Emergency Managers, the 15 largest emergency management organizations in the country. And that shows us, like in Hurricane Sandy, the example was that we create microgrids, literally one generator at a time in 1,000 different cases, because power goes out and now we need to restore power to at least critical infrastructure, to our most disadvantaged customers, our populations that are electrically dependent, our hospitals, our nursing homes, our dialysis clinics. The more that can be done ahead of time, the less work it is for those of us in emergency management. In the other larger blockchain application, much of what we do is resource management. You talk about blockchain as trust, right? That you can verify all those elements. If you could put that into place with smart contracts, we'll use the example of Haiti. In the Haiti example, there were 17 national or multinational organizations working disaster relief. And over 90% of all the resource orders could have been filled by blockchain with smart contracts.
Wow.
It would have eliminated all the people that are sitting there trying to manually fill each one of those orders. And so all those people wouldn't have to be flowed in, they wouldn't have to be fed, they wouldn't have to be watered, lodged, taken care of, while they try to find, oh, you need a generator, and you need a helicopter, and all that could be digitalized. You could actually make a system, SAP has demoed that, of basically making it all a smart contract. Okay, you have helicopters, you need people, and they need to go to a hospital, you could do all that basically autonomously. So from the standpoint as an emergency manager, I'm interested not only in the energy side, the more you protect the energy grid, the less I have to rebuild it afterwards. But the really great thing about just sharing resources autonomously, where I don't have to insert a lot of people, a lot of manpower, and a lot of phone books, where you can do that digitally instead.
Excellent. Very good lead in to Chuck. Why don't you tell us a little about yourself and how you are working on resiliency?
Thanks. My name is Chuck Manto. I have a small R&D firm, as she had said. Since 2004, a number of us have been looking at a category of problems that are unusual, namely things that could impact the bulk of the country for 30 days or longer. Over the years, we started to find more and more people as subject matter experts talking about it, so we convinced the FBI to allow us to create a program, a nationwide program, where any infrastructure professional can get together and share notes about this. And just as sort of something to hold up, show and tell, we would have an annual conference on this where we would bring people together from as diverse places as the White House, Congress, military, civilian businesses, and technology leaders to basically talk through these issues. And the kinds of issues we're looking at are things like assaults on the grid, whether it's a 100-year solar storm by nature, electromagnetic pulse attack, without going into explanation as to what that is, a cyber attack, a coordinated physical attack, and so on. As a result of some of those things over the years, by 2015 and 16, the Defense Department came out publicly saying, we have a real problem. We are no longer confident that we can continue our operations at military bases or defense critical infrastructure. And they did this in an RFP to small businesses in the program called the Small Business Innovation Research Program. Here's a copy of the contract. I was one of the 3 companies that did that. We can talk about it later. It's another show and tell item. And what you learn is that they're saying it's such a problem, it's relatively imminent, because it takes years to solve this problem. It's relatively imminent that military bases will be unable to operate weeks, months, or permanently. Therefore, they call on the entrepreneurial community to invent EMP and cyber-hardened microgrids so these bases could make the power on site, as could their civilian counterparts like hospitals, water utilities, and other kinds of businesses, local governments such as he would be responding with, and be able to solve that problem. They don't know how to spell EMP, they certainly don't have it in their budget. They don't fully understand microgrids. The military's been far more advanced than most in deploying them, but half of them or more don't have batteries or way to store their power. There's lots of good reasons why that happened, but to be able to operate in island mode is essential. And one of the things I'm appealing to you about on this first point is that as you do blockchain, I encourage you to think about how you can make this industry even more resilient by doing whatever you do in blockchain from the bottom up. In other words, make it possible for that individual island to be able to persevere and do their work and not be dependent on some centralized authority or technology far away. So the most important thing I would encourage you to do, whether you're a customer and you're going to demand that capability from your supplier, or you're a supplier offering that capability to your customer. And the second part of this is the money. If I'm a hospital and half my power is something that I have to make myself in case the grid goes down, with my diesel generators, and hospitals know how to do that, they're more advanced than most of us. They can do that, but how would they do that if the grid's not available and diesel fuel's not available? Well, the only way is if they make it themselves. The good news there is if you're making half your own power, your power bill just went down by half. The problem is that the utilities are so capable in what they've been doing, they usually can give you electricity or power at a more competitive rate than you can with your microgrid. So if I'm going to replace my utility with my own power, for every dollar I save, I might wind up having to spend $1.20. So how do I make up that gap so I don't have to find more money out of my budget? Because if you're a hospital, you don't have extra money. Similarly, if you're a county government, you don't have extra money floating around. So this again is where blockchain comes in. If I'm making 80% of the money I need for my microgrid by savings, that's great. But that other 20 cents might come from my ability to make a little extra power and sell it to my neighbor with the help of my utility, split the money and so on, not unlike what Brooklyn Microgrid is doing. And if you can track all those transactions capably, you might be able to make up that gap that you otherwise would have, so you could fully fund your own resilient microgrid out of the savings and the little bit extra you have. That could come from something like blockchain. So I would encourage you to think of blockchain as part of the solution that you could implement to fully fund the resilience that we don't have today.
Excellent, thank you. And Chris, one thing I didn't mention, but speaking of fully funding, but fully functional, you have the only fully functional blockchain solution demonstration, I think, that I've ever seen at something like this. And your background also comes from oil and gas. You were at ConocoPhillips for many years. So kind of jumping around here for a minute, I was just thinking about the attack recently on Saudi Arabia's, and we lost 5% of the entire world's oil supply, correct? And it was 50% of theirs. And we lost all of their emergency oil supply, which is 2 million barrels per day that they had as a backup that they could not access. And the country, our economic markets really didn't blink much at that, which is shocking. So what do you see, how do you see in the oil and gas industry sort of blockchain working for good?
It's a great question. And one of the things that blockchain is not a use case for, which you just highlighted, is bad actors with drones that can blow things up, right? We can't do anything about that. And blockchain could not have solved that problem. However, the tanks that were hit in that attack are made up of very specific metallurgy specific to the process of that. In that case, holding hydrogen sulfide from the crude oil stabilization process, which is highly toxic. I mean, if it gets out and you're near, you're dead pretty fast. For the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to come out really quickly and say, we'll have this on by Monday, any engineer who's worked in oil and gas, who knows about metallurgy, and I used to have to travel all around the world getting pipes and valves and just the specific chemistry right to do these things, knows that it does not take till Monday to get that stuff back, right? So, I mean, if you know that, the first thing you should probably do is go out and, buy and go long crude oil futures, right? So, early in my career, I worked in hardening SCADA systems and oil field controls, pipeline infrastructure against nefarious actors. Back then, we were having issues with North Korea, similar to what we are now. My boss at the time demanded that I have full-scale backups of the plant control system in this liquid anhydrous ammonia plant I was responsible for the control system in, and have it off-site so that if the North Koreans ever launched an EMP attack, and by the way, these were 8-inch magnetic disc, right, that the configuration was on. We had to catch down the technology in that plant. He said, we need to be ready to go. And I said, well, if that ever happens, me reloading the configuration on this plant control system is the last thing I'm going to be doing. So what we can do is we can track metallurgies and make sure that we get the right materials so that we don't have we don't have pipeline incidents where things like that are in oil and gas. One of the things we're doing at Hyperchain Labs is our demo here is the business network, the business efficiency that Ryan hit on in emergency management, where you don't need care and feeding of all those people in that process, where we actually have the business equivalent on our only running blockchain network, I think, here at this conference it's the business analogy to what you described in emergency services. But on the security side, for anti-fragility and energy and grids and some of the things we're talking about here today, there is a thought process around taking all these IoT devices that are coming into what we used to call field instrumentation back in the day, and making sure that they can't be tampered with, to your point earlier. And so one of the things that we're looking at doing is making sure that we embed. How many people heard the word identity management is really important in blockchain at this conference so far? Raise your hand, right? That's not just for people. That's for devices that are attached to all these things that we're trying to control and protect. So embedding cryptographic identities that were issued blockchain certificates on these devices, even if you have to do it one at a time, it's not 100% hack-proof, foolproof, nothing ever is. But it's a lot harder to tamper with that than for me to hack into your SAP system, right? So I had a CIO ask me one time when I was with my former employer, I'm not too sure about the blockchain security stuff and if we should even do blockchain. And I said, well, if blockchain security keeps you up at night, then SAP ought to scare the hell out of you. It's a lot easier to hack into. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at around identity management on device. That's going to be a really big thing, in addition to identity management of actors on your blockchain. So be thoughtful, and can I get a quick audience poll? Who is here because they want to try to implement blockchain in their business? Raise your hand. Who is here because they want technical information and they're super technical and they're blockchain savvy? Raise your hand. Some of you, right? That's good. So how many people think that your company is going to adopt blockchain, whether it's in energy, anti-fragility, or anything in the next year? Raise your hand. See? So the ramp to this isn't super fast. There's no blockchain, outside the ICO space, there's no blockchain billionaires running around out there. So I'll close by saying blockchain is really easy to talk about and really hard to do. And make sure that you talk to enough people to make sure that you have a balanced viewpoint on some of the things that you should be looking at. Tomorrow, I will be doing in this room blockchain for non-technical people that will address exactly how you try to implement blockchain in your company and how to identify use cases if you're a non-technical person. It's the business of blockchain that we'll be talking about tomorrow.
Excellent, thank you.
We got 5 minutes on this.
Yes, so speaking of IoT devices, earlier today, Pamela Norton with Bracetto was saying that by 2027, we'll have 75 billion IoT devices. And thinking about that, she has a nanotechnology that can, be applied to those devices and help prevent somebody, breaking in or replicating. So that might be an interesting solution to talk about as well. And then one other thing, going back to North Korea, because every time I hear North Korea, I think about what Ryan said about revolving north-south satellites.
Yeah.
So would you want to?
Oh, just that what I'm saying about North Korea, by the way, is completely open source. This is not the classified side, which would scare the hell out of you. But for quite some time, for over now 12 years, there have been 2 satellites that that North Korea launched. One that goes over basically the middle of the country, Lawrence, Kansas, and one that goes over DC. And they're built, and they seem to have no other purpose than to circle over those 2 sites. Imagine if either of those was electromagnetic pulse weapon, which the Russians have said in open forum that they gave to them. That would eliminate electricity. You'd be back in the 1860s. Without the skills of the people in the 1860s to do everything without a computer. So that having an analog process or having an analog backup to your system is important. The more we digitalize, the more we go to everything being remote controlled, the harder it is to get resilient because you cut down staff. Many oil pipelines, as an example, in San Jose, California, we got hit by the Metcalf attack. So armed actors shot the transformers in our major substation. Now, the substation, they hacked it, they clipped the one wire that set the alarm, they did everything. If one person hadn't seen the fluctuation in the grid and switched over to the Fremont station, we would have lost that station for about 4 to 6 months. At a cost relatively small, $1 billion an hour. It's San Jose. It's 100 of the top 100 companies run something through that. Facebook alone is running all their data out of that. And that's because they have to be 75 miles from our point of presence, which is the only near site point of presence to Asia. That's a horrible thought to lose just one city. But in that case, you close the gas valves. The gas valves only close one way. To open them, you have to go and actually physically check the valve and then open them.
A major collapse, would I be angry at the utilities? Well, maybe it's my responsibility to take care of my family and my neighborhood. And if we need electricity to do it, or water, or comms, all I've been doing is outsourcing that to a contractor. It's my responsibility to provide it, not theirs. The fact that they fail me or are in the process of failing me means I either have to change contractors or do it myself. And this is the opportunity you have here by thinking about blockchain. You need to be able, within your sphere of influence, whether it's at home, your business, or church, and begin to take the responsibility of making your survival and thriving possible by the things you do locally. And in terms of energy, I call it local energy. But everything else has to be driven locally, and blockchain theoretically could be a piece of that puzzle if you drive it in that direction.
And I also want to mention that, because Chuck's very passionate about this, about energy and resiliency, and I wanted to mention that he is also a biblical scholar, and it's applicable in thinking about how you're not only prepared, but about how you prepare to make sure that to forgive your.
Well, I'll just say that, just one thing, that we make resilience.
I have to have coffee in the morning, so my apocalypse plan B, to Ryan's point, I have a percolator pot underneath my gas range in the kitchen. I think Hunter, last word?
Yeah.
Any last words?
No, I don't have anything to add. That's all right.
You look like you were getting ready to tell me just.
No, but Hunter, teaches kids at the university teaches kids at the university how to learn about blockchain and become very involved. And it's highly, highly important that we teach our young people and young women and everybody in STEM.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, building on some of the things that Tom just talked about, Colorado is a great community to get more people involved in projects, even if it's prototypes, so they are aware of these problems, but they're also then skilled to go out and help solve the problems.
Okay. Sorry, I was looking over at Will and I didn't see this.
All right, excellent presentation.